So Pascal, this week we're going to talk about a relatively recent film, but before we talk about the relatively recent film, we've once again going to have to go back in time just to tee this up. Do you remember in 1982 that fabulous film called Blade Runner?
Oh my goodness. And you know what I remember actually was the radio adverts on French radio stations and the music by Vangelis. And the very much like we mentioned before, the anticipation to go to the movies, to go and see this movie. And then once you see the trailer on TV and so on. But I remember one film critic saying about Blade Runner that was obviously created in 1982, this is sci-fi at its best. It is as good as it gets. And I think that to me was it, which is this was the ultimate sci-fi movie. It had everything that you would want from something that was looking to the future, but also had, good lessons and good morals and some really compelling character, primarily obviously played by Harrison Ford.
Yeah, and At the time, I think the studios bottled it, didn't they? They thought that the visuals are too dark, the storyline might be a little bit too, might need the audience to do a little bit more work than they would normally do. So the studio bottled it, and the original release of the film had a fairly dreadful voiceover to explain the plot to people, which, is always a bad sign. Eventually, they corrected that by launching a director's cut, which did away with that dreadful voiceover and effectively let the audience do what they should have done and use their intelligence to fit the plot together. But I guess because of that original version was a little bit ropey, it wasn't an immediate massive box office success. But over the years, it has gained so much more accolades and fans and great feedback and great reviews. And yes, it is indeed one of the most amazing science fiction films that has ever been made. I mean, the visuals, the representation of that future rain-splattered Earth, that horrible, dark, dank city, unbelievable visuals. And naturally, people wanted a sequel. And I think that Blade Runner has been one of those films which we've been promised a sequel for years and years, and then it was going to happen, and then it wasn't, and then it's going to happen, and then it wasn't, and finally, in 2017, we get the sequel, Blade Runner 2049. Now, the original Blade Runner was set in 2019, and therefore the 30 years that has elapsed in real time has elapsed within the film timeline as well. And I think you would agree that the marketing build-up, and I guess the anticipation just from being an original Blade Runner fan for those 30 years, that build-up combined with the marketing build-up really set us up for something truly spectacular. But did it actually fulfill on its promise, Pascal? So we're now talking about Blade Runner 2049. That's the film that was released a few years back.
So I want to talk to you about the marketing, the lead up, and then I'll ask your views and I'll share mine about the film itself. But just reacting as well to your comment about, the studios lost their nerves about the 1982 version. I was thinking, my goodness, this poor director, Ridley Scott, how much does he have to do to prove himself and be left alone to get on with the work? Because by that time, he'd produced Alien and a few other films, but, we are where we are. And so with regard to the Blade Runner 2049, I somehow must have missed that they were thinking about it, because my first surprise was to see the teaser posters where they reproduced, the calligraphy of the original Blade Runner movie, and with the year 2049, I was like, oh my God, what is going on here? And then soon after, we had posters which were essentially, it was artwork as far as I was concerned. Do you remember the very, very first one where you felt you could frame this and have it in your house or your kind of den of geekery? So I was really excited about the teasers in particular.
Absolutely right. I mean, let's face it, the visuals within both Blade Runner films are fabulous. The cinematography was great. The color palette, if that's the right word, was amazing. And the way that transcribed into the visuals for the marketing, to me, is one of the best parts of the experience. It's just whether the actual ultimate film was worth actually waiting for.
And then you've got the first teaser trailer. So we had static images, and like I said, those posters, I would encourage any of you to seek them out online. They are beautiful. Then you've got the teaser trailer. I think it was barely 30 seconds, and it begins with the voice of Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, and I'm pretty sure it was from the original Blade Runner. And there was just in the background a bit of a sound from the original music. It gave me a goosebump. I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be truly outstanding. And the first bits where I got a bit nervous when they started to do the new posters, which felt very, very marketing-y. I mean, felt like it'd been done by someone that just learned to use Photoshop. And the trailers, the full version, I was thinking, oh, I'm not so sure about this. I mean, how did you feel when the marketing machine took over?
It made me wonder, a bit like you. I thought the original teasers, again, they're setting up a thing of beauty here, and then it was almost like they started to dismantle it before we even got to the launch. So it felt to me as if they'd done a fabulous job of teeing up the film initially, and the marketing was working, and I was getting excited. And then all of a sudden, it was almost like they'd given the marketing job to somebody else
yes.
who had a completely different view and a completely different vision, and he started to effectively undo all the emotions and the feelings that I had about the way the film was coming together.
No, I would agree. And then it carried on. We had, I think, a second trailer. We had more of this, more of that. And, even when they did the rounds, talking on chat shows and so on, I was thinking, I just don't know about this. And then the rumor started with regard to Harrison Ford not being in the film that much. And I went, hang on a minute, because when you watch the teasers, or when you look at, the posters and so on, the impression, because of course his voice is used a lot, is that the character is obviously will carry on with the same character for 30 years. And then I've got nothing against Ryan Gosling, and I think that the character he played of Kay, another LAPD officer, chasing obviously the being the replicant, the Blade Runner, chasing the replicants. But I started to think, on a minute, what are we going to get here? Because my hero is Deckard, and I need to know whether or not that I'm going to get that.
Yeah, again, when we eventually did watch the film, and my initial impressions of the film was it did look beautiful, and they tried to maintain that sort of the way the storytelling was quite detailed in close-ups and the way they used the scenery and the weather and the emotion and the color schemes. And the storytelling is even in the original was quite slow, but it was never boring because I thought that it needed that detail. But it felt laboured, and I kept waiting for Harrison Ford to appear. And half an hour goes by, where's Harrison? 45 minutes goes by, where's Harrison? An hour goes by. You think, is Harrison actually going to appear other than as a in the post-credit sequence or something like that? And then finally he's there, and it all seems to wrap up quite quickly and not very satisfactorily. So I just felt like I'd been bait and switched in some way, and that I'd been waiting 30 years for something that didn't actually, although it looked beautiful, it just didn't actually fulfill its promise.
No, you're absolutely right. And I just realized actually that only the previous episode we did discuss a sequel. I just realized that's what we've done purely by accident. Again, viewers and listeners, don't think that we are that smart that we can do things like this. So we spoke about obviously Mad Max Fury Road, and obviously we had a very, very different reaction. Please do go back and watch and listen to this. But for this one, I remember actually I went to the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle upon Tyne with our good friend Richard Tubb to go and see it.
Yes.
And I remember we actually had lunch in town. We were talking. We were excited. We were reminiscing about Blade Runner, the 1982 version. We sat there, and I'm pretty sure we didn't speak to each other, but I could tell. And then when we left, we walked upstairs to they have a wonderful restaurant and bar, the Tyneside Cinema, and we just sat there, looked at each other, thinking, oh. And there's nothing worse as a film fan, film goer, to feel just a little disappointed and down. And sometimes I feel bad for the makers because I know all too well how much effort goes into creating an amazing movie. And listen, this was nearly 3 hours of visual spectacle and treat. But we sat there thinking, yeah, nah, and there we are. And for me, like you, I was thinking, well, you suggested to us as part of the marketing that our hero Deckard would be with us. And then when he did appear, I do have a thing about this idea of a hero that is brought back into a sequel has changed into a grumpy old man, Roger. And I need to kind of challenge that, the way they've done with Luke Skywalker and many other, franchises. I'd like to think that if when you and I, are met in the future by other people, we're not going to be grumpy old men, but actually having a great life,
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I hadn't really thought about the Luke Skywalker Deckard thing there, but you're absolutely right. And again, it felt to me as that they try to replicate the strong characters from the original film, but they failed. The visuals I do think they got right, but the pacing, they tried to replicate that intricate, painstaking detail of the original, but they didn't quite get that right as well, so that failed. I think some of the the returning characters, like the Rachel was in it to a certain extent as well, and hints to the past, but that didn't quite work, and it just felt as if that they just were going through we need to tick the visuals box, we need to tick the returning characters box, but they didn't think of it as a whole. It was just a series of boxes to tick, and that's why it just didn't land. What it does make me wonder, Pascal, and again we do try to focus on the marketing for this, is that if you have something which, I mean, they must have known that it wasn't going to be as good as the original, but they've got to promote it. They've got to get people to go and sit in the cinema and watch it. But can you actually genuinely market something which is subpar and then expect people to agree with the marketing thing? Yeah, that was fab. The marketing said it was fab, so it was fab. When in fact they know that it's going to be a bit of a dud. Do you not have to? Some films they'll just, okay, we know it's going to be the reviews are going to be rubbish, so we'll just we'll release it straight onto DVD. Maybe it was just the whole impetus for this film was just so great that they couldn't do anything other than try to push it as strongly as they did.
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to agree with you. When you look at the teaser posters and teaser video, it feels like it was an individual or group of individual team that really understood the mythology of Blade Runner and the world. And then the team that took over from there didn't. Perhaps, and they just applied almost, those colors will do, that layout, frankly, resembled almost the kind of action films you see like Fast and Furious and so on in terms of presenting the different characters. But, to your point though, Harrison Ford, the character of Deckard, had his own profile poster, which that's what they do. They split the characters of the different story. So they did that, and it was just so strange because he was suggesting, therefore, it was almost, in my head, it was, well, he'll basically going to have a rookie played by Ryan Gosling, and through essentially their interaction, we're going to discover the world 30 years later, and they're going to explore still this idea of what happens to essentially artificial human beings, the replicants, I beg your pardon. It was Nexus 6 in the 1982 version. Now we're in Nexus 15, and we are upgraded, and they are even more lifelike and human-like. And what is obviously, what are we going to explore? Because that was essentially part of the theme. And I felt that they were not exploring anything new or anything at all. And what was actually also great about the first one is, the fact that there was a Tyler Corporation, a Tyrell Corporation, I think that was the name. And there was therefore, a whole organization behind it that they were also up against. And here we had a bit of a baddie, a bit of a psychopath that used to kind of, talk to himself and, do a few gruesome things. But I didn't believe in the threat from the corporation, which is also at the heart of the first one. So I think you're right. Really, really can't fault the movie visually. And indeed, I'm told that now that you know what the movie is all about, watching it again on Blu-ray makes it actually a great, enjoyable movie. But first time sat at the movies with my good friend Richard, I felt that I'd been misinformed slightly and just shortchanged because I think, well, it should have been a better story for sure.
Yeah, I think the lesson is that, marketing, the actual communications part of marketing, the promotion part of marketing, however hard you try, if your product isn't hitting the spot, if you haven't done your job understanding what your customers want and delivering it, then the marketing of the actual product is always going to fail to a certain extent, or at least over deliver on something which isn't going to live up to people's expectations. So I think that's probably the first time on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast that we haven't been hanging from the ceiling with enthusiasm for one of the films that we've reviewed. But I'm not actually apologising for that, because I think sometimes you do have to look at the ones that haven't quite hit the mark, because you can learn just as much from the ones that have been a bit flat than you can from the ones that have been absolutely buzzing.
I've got a question for you, actually, just before we wrap up, on film marketing in general, and particularly this movie, Blade Runner 2049. So they did, because they could, this was released in 2017. Interestingly, released worldwide pretty much within a working week, which I thought was interesting as well. There was no long delays that we've known in the past. But I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on social media when marketing a film. And so they will make a big song and dance about the official website and the official Facebook page, usually on Instagram and so on. But for me, the challenge, and I don't have an answer really, I'm just perplexed, when you are the production team and so on, and a movie is now literally 3.5 years old, how do you keep the Facebook page running? How do you keep the content running and make it interesting, or do you accept that it's for a while, and then you have pretty much a kind of dormant page where I think the last time they posted anything relevant to the film was probably a year ago, if not longer?
That's a very good question. I guess that unless there's another sequel in the planning, I imagine that they'll get to a point where they'll just say there just isn't enough interest. And whether they're checking the views on the page to see how many people are still coming in, it'll just get to the stage where everybody's been redeployed elsewhere and they're not prepared to spend the money on somebody keeping the social media page updated. It's
another one, isn't it? Because, from you and I suppose, primarily from the business world as opposed to filmmaking world, to leave any platform that controls your brand and your reputation essentially unattended for a long time is a big no-no. But what is the answer for a film? Can you keep the engagement going for years to come, or do you agree that there's a time where it has to stop? But then do you need to make it almost like make a formal announcement saying, that is it, the last post for Blade Runner 2049. Thanks again for your support, and please come back to look at the archives, as opposed to just a post from a year and a half ago with no other form of communication.
Personally, I would like them to bring it to an end and just say, just as you've said, thank you, this is the end, and then it stops and it becomes an archive. Because otherwise, it's almost like it started out as the shop window, as the trailblazer for it. But then at the moment, it's almost like become a gravestone, hasn't it?
Yeah.
For the Blade Runner movie.
So here you go. For you viewers and listeners, what would you do if you were in charge of the Facebook page for Blade Runner 2049? What would you do with it and still create a sense of excitement? I'd love you to hear from your thoughts on that.
Well, Pascal, what a show. We've talked about lots of audio stuff, and that was unexpected. I really feel upbeat about all the things that we've talked about in today's episode, and I can't wait to listen to it back, and obviously can't wait to get it out there for everybody else to listen to and watch. So, guys, thank you so much once again for listening and watching Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. Please do subscribe either on YouTube or on your favourite podcasting app. Leave us comments, ask us questions, leave suggestions in all the usual places. Until next time, please do go out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.